Hey, yo, what's going on, guys? Scott Hall has passed away. We are here in this episode, this podcast. This is not going to be a raw review. This is going to be all about the bad guy. And we're going to talk about the life and career of Scott Hall, a.k.a. Razor Ramon, a.k.a. the bad guy, the founding father of the NWO, and possibly even the founding father of modern professional wrestling. I don't think some fans, especially young ones, will ever truly understand his influence and how much his situation, along with Kevin Nash's leaving WWE in 1996, how much that changed the business and how many things domino affected after that happened that basically gave us the industry that we see today. And this is a monumental loss in pro wrestling. We're going to talk about everything here. We're going to be shooting the shit a lot here in the chat too, talking about Scott Hall memories. We'll talk about the circumstances of his death. Unfortunately, he went in for, I guess, hip replacement surgery and suffered a lot of complications, had 3 heart attacks, I believe, on Saturday or Friday perhaps, and was on life support. And then it was around 1 in the morning here, Pacific time in California last night, that Kevin Nash posted an update on Instagram, a pretty devastating update saying that Scott Hall would be taken off life support once all of the family has arrived and they were in place. They did that today. Scott Hall apparently went on to live for several more hours, and we didn't even get the word. Raw was about to go on the air, and there was still no word if he passed away. Sean Waltman and Kevin Nash and everybody else was saying he's still with us, and they confirmed the reports that he did not pass away immediately after shutting off the life support. And here we all were waiting for word to come out on his death. And basically the way everybody found out and got this news confirmed to them was by WWE when they opened up Raw with the Rest in Peace Scott Hall graphic, or in memory of Scott Hall graphic. And WWE wouldn't do that unless they knew for sure. So that was pretty much our confirmation that unfortunately Scott Hall did pass away today. It's very sad and unfortunate because it sounds like it was complications from surgery. But as we try to do on this channel with everything, we're going to try our best to look at, the silver lining here. And the silver lining, I think, is we got Scott Hall a lot more years than many of us thought we should have. And he was able to really clean himself up and maybe find a little bit of redemption and peace prior to his passing. When ESPN ran that E60 documentary, I think that was back in 2011. That was 11 years ago. And he had hit about as rock bottom as you can get, especially with a lot of the health problems he had and the drug problems and in and out of rehab. And he was so close to the edge, that it was a miracle that he didn't pass away. And not only was he able to recover from that, he was able to hook up with DDP, turn his life around, get for the most part cleaned up, went into the Hall of Fame in 2014, and was able to make lots of pro wrestling appearances, in WWE, on a lot of those classic Raw shows, a lot of DX stuff. I met him on the Jericho Cruise a couple of years ago, and he was able to interact with some fans there the final few years. And these were years that many of us thought we wouldn't even get with Scott. So we're going to at least try to appreciate that and, at least honor those last few years that he gave us that, could have easily not happened. Unfortunately, when you hear of a passing like this, it feels like it could have been avoided because it was relatively routine surgery that led to his heart attacks, but he's already had a bad ticker, and I know he's had pacemakers and lots of health issues before, and I guess all of that, probably combined to lead to his unfortunate and, somewhat short death, just came a little bit too soon. Was hoping to get Scott Hall clean and happy and sober for a few more years before anything horrible happened. Thoughts go out to his family, of course, all of his friends in the business, and, most specifically the Click members. Looked like this was really difficult for Kevin Nash and Sean Waltman specifically to deal with. You didn't hear a lot from Triple H until, I guess, during Raw. He sent out a tweet, and Shawn Michaels, I'm not really sure what he's been saying, but it's a huge loss. And like I said, we're going to kind of unpack all of it here. I want to run through Scott's career. The cool thing about doing a video or a podcast on Scott Hall is that I barely had to make any notes. I know his career in my head backwards and front. There's very little preparation I have to do for this because I lived through everything. And I've told the story many times. I even put it on Twitter tonight that my very first apartment after moving away, after graduating high school, moving out of my parents' house and going out on my own and venturing into adulthood, the very first apartment I ever had was a dump. Was this little shithole apartment in downtown Greenville, North Carolina, and I had a roommate, and I had just moved in, about 6 months before this. And it was getting into the summertime now. It was real hot. And like I said, the place was a dump. It only had a window unit air conditioning. It didn't have like central heat and air and everything. And I remember flipping on Raw and Nitro that night at the end of May. And I still remember the vibe. I remember how it smelled. And I remember the sound that the air conditioning made as I'm watching on my little Magnavox 19-inch TV. I've got my shirt off. It's a hot, summer day or almost summer day down in the South. And I'm flipping back and forth, and I've got it on Nitro, and out comes Scott Hall in that denim outfit, and hey, you know who I am type of promo, and we all know that and remember that, and that basically kickstarted Kevin Nash coming in and the formation of the NWO in an angle that really, really changed wrestling permanently in terms of how storylines and the fan base that was targeted was changed. But not only was that changed, how pro wrestling worked in general was changed. Now that WCW was there as a true strong competitor financially to Vince, you had guys jumping ship. Contracts and guaranteed money began with Scott Hall leaving because Vince couldn't match what WCW did, and that's when a lot of these contracts and these ironclad contracts and these clauses and these stipulations and all this stuff started. Scott Hall and Nash making that jump really got a lot of wrestlers paid now that there were two places to go, and one place is willing to shell out a lot of bucks. You kind of see that now that we've got a second company here in America to compete with WWE and AEW, giving wrestlers a chance to go out there and make some money and even maybe leverage and get themselves better deals. This all began, how contracts were structured, and just wrestling and the pay scales in general completely changed the night Scott Hall showed up in WCW, and Vince McMahon knew it was a completely different game being played now, and now he's on the ropes. He's the one on the fence after running around doing that same shit to everybody else during the territory days. Now he's found somebody, that can duke it out with him and steal stars from him, just like he used to do to everybody else. A lot of people thought it was karma, but it was a very significant change and shift in the wrestling business. And if you're a young fan that might only be in his 20s or might not even been born when Scott Hall made that jump, let me tell you, shit was never the same after that Nitro in 1996. The entire business changed that night. And Scott Hall, was the face that you put with that change. And he's going to go down in history as the guy that changed it, because he really was. And if you weren't around that time, or you're too young, or you don't remember, I don't know what to tell you. But if you're my age and you remember this stuff, you know what a big deal it was. And you remember how huge that was to see him over there, and the voice and the fucking hair and the hey yo, and like, holy shit, Razor Ramon is on Nitro. By that point, we knew Hall and Nash were leaving. It was out in the dirt sheets and the hotlines. There were still ways to get information, but it wasn't like the internet is now. There was only a handful of fans that knew the deal with them. Not everybody. Now everybody knows who's coming and who's going. The entire wrestling world, even if you don't pay any attention to backstage news or read websites regularly or not, you probably heard that it's likely Cody Rhodes is going to show up on Raw tonight, even though he didn't. So everybody knows everything now. But back in the day, there was only a few fans. I'd probably say 20% of the audience was aware that Hall and Nash had left WWE. Hall wasn't even around because he was suspended and got brought back right at the end to do some jobs on the way out. But Nash worked WrestleMania, and he was jobbing on the way out too. So when they went over there, it was just in the nick of time. The internet had not reached the strength yet to where fans were going to be wise to what was really going on. There was a lot of fans fooled. There were a lot of people that legit thought Razor Ramon and Diesel jumped to WCW, just like a lot of fans probably legit thought that Ric Flair jumped to WWE, and WWE and WCW have some working agreement, and Ric Flair was invading the WWE because he brought the big gold belt with him. That was a very eerie thing to see. But Hall and Nash, I think, arguably made a bigger impact in 96 because of how wrestling exploded and became so appealing to such a wide portion of the fans, young people, people in their 20s, and older folks, young men, women, everybody across the board had something that they could watch wrestling and relate to. And that all started, with Scott Hall jumping over there and going in forming the NWO with with Nash and Hulk Hogan, and that whole thing just fit perfectly, but he really kickstarted it, with Nash coming over later, then of course Bash at the Beach, Hogan turning heel and forming the NWO, and the rest is history. He's had quite the career for himself, and like I said, we're going to talk about some of our favorite Scott Hall memories, because he's got a lot of them. His career is sectioned off into sections, and each section of his career has got really, really memorable matches and moments, especially during his IC title run days in the WWE and his Outsider and NWO days in WCW. So we'll talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly with Scott Hall, see if you guys have any memories that you would like to share and discuss as it relates to him. And it's just a sad day. It hasn't been the greatest weekend in pro wrestling. Of course, this past Friday, Big E suffered a broken neck on SmackDown and is going to be out God knows how long. He does have some good news in terms of paralysis and displacement and surgery. None of that happened, and none of that is necessary. However, a broken neck is still a broken neck, and there are absolutely no guarantees that Big E will be able to wrestle again. So we've really been keeping him in our thoughts a lot, and then to turn around and get hit with this Scott Hall news was, I think, a punch in the gut that a lot of people weren't ready for. I know I wasn't. So, like I said, I met him a couple years ago. Even at his age and probably the health that he's in, he seemed fine, mobile, in good spirits and all of that, and it's just a shame that, something like this happened. But it's the way it goes. I think as wrestling fans, we have dealt with enough tragedy in our lives, and we hear news like this all the time that we've almost become numb to it. Like I said, I guess the only silver lining here is Scott Hall's death didn't come at in an even more tragic way, like it could have 10 years ago. And like I said, I've always considered from the time that Scott Hall connected with Diamond Dallas Page, that time up until now, I've always considered bonus. It's just bonus time, because there was a really solid chance we weren't going to get any of that time at all, and you can look at Jake the Snake Roberts in much the same way, and anybody else who has somehow escaped, the Reaper when it comes to pro wrestling. A lot of guys aren't so lucky, especially people with demons or addicted to drugs and alcohol or both or worse. All these things that we've seen. Hell, Vice has a whole series on the dark side of the professional wrestling business. So the fact that we have a couple of, stories that turned out to have relatively happy endings, like Scott Hall, like I'm hoping Jake Roberts has, the fact that he's been able to get back into the business a little bit and interact and be, for the most part, clean and sober, it's bonus time. It's bonus time for guys like that. But unfortunately, our bonus time with Scott Hall has come to an end. So that's kind of like my little opening deal there. We're going to start talking about some Razor Ramon and Scott Hall memories here. I want to say hi to everybody here in the chat as well and see if you guys have anything to add, answer any super chats that happen to be in here, and also ask you guys to please smash that thumbs up button. Do it for Scott Hall. Come on, let's get these likes up high. If you can't do it for me, do it for the bad guy. Also, make sure you subscribe if you have not yet already. And let me know all of your favorite Scott Hall or Razor Ramon memories here in the chat as we go through. George Morris, I want to thank you for that $5 earlier on. Welcome back. Good to see you. Hey, Greg, how are you doing? Very sad about Scott Hall following the news on and off at work. Just ordered the original Razor Ramon shirt as a tribute. Man, I remember that old Razor shirt. It was so ugly back in the day. Now it's awesome. It sticks out like a sore thumb. You can see it from across the arena. I like to see people wearing them, but I remember when it came out, it was kind of considered like an ugly shirt. I just think people were criticizing it from what I remember. But yeah, that old Razor Ramon shirt was a fucking classic. There was no wrestling shirts like it. I mean, nowadays, every single wrestling shirt has to be black. I appreciate that they got a little nuts with that Razor shirt back in 1994, that yellow, and it covered the whole thing. It looks good now. I just think at the time, I wasn't a fan. Yeah, everybody's super sad and devastated about Scott Hall. Nice to see all these heartfelt comments in the chat here. Chris Ludecki, I want to thank you as well. Appreciate the $5. Hey, yo, Greg, in 2002, Raw had a main event of the original 3 NWO members versus Austin and Rock. Yeah, I remember that. Is that the biggest main event in Raw history? It's up there. I don't think it was advertised and booked as the biggest, but man, it's hard to find a bigger one. Austin, Rock, and Hogan all in the same match. What other bigger match would there be? You know what I mean? So I guess on paper, definitely. Austin and Rock, the two most over parts of WWE against the most over faction in WCW's history. Yeah, definitely. Biggest main event ever. But I don't think it gets the love for that, It's not talked about that often. It's one of the only times Austin and Hogan have actually been in the ring and interacted with each other. So they don't really bring it up much. What's up, Kevin? Good to see you as well. K-Dogs, Ken, I'll appreciate the 5 from you. Tough day for pro wrestling. That is indeed. I am almost 40, and I grew up watching Scott Hall. I take this one very, very hard, pretty hard. Very underrated on the mic for sure. Yeah, Scott was great. I thought he had a great look, and he was a really good wrestler. He doesn't get too much credit for being like a legit good in-ring worker, but he was. I think he was, other than Shawn, I think he was the best of the clique. I do. So he, or no, I'm sorry, maybe Shawn and the two Shawns, and then followed by Razor. But he was really good for a big guy, super marketable. And we're going to talk about some of his early days. I mean, he had a couple of tryouts, and he passed through the WWE a couple times before coming in as Razor, and I'm surprised WWE never grabbed him. Just like how we hear stories of Wardlow and Jade Cargill have actually walked inside of and been in front of WWE trainers before, and they weren't having contracts shoved in their face. What gives? But he did get in there eventually, and they pushed him quick once he finally did make the jump to WWE. Michael Cuomo, good to see you as well. Appreciate the 5 from you. Months ago at my job, we made a section of Scott paper towels and called it the Scott Hall. I love that. That's awesome. Scott paper towels. All righty. Right on. Okay, well, that at least takes care of the super chats for now. Like I said, keep smashing that thumbs up button if you don't mind. There's a good audience in here now, so I'm not going to be able to do all of these shout-outs, but happy to see all my monkey wrenches in here. Good to see Ronnie, Population 420, Evan, Neal, Denny, Twanky, Martin, Hot Rod, David, Metal, Maureen. Yeah, there's a million of you in here. Right on. So we're going to get into some Scott Hall discussion, some Scott Hall chatter here, talk about his career, and, just discuss the influence and the mark he's going to leave, because like I opened up with here in that opening little monologue, his that move to WCW in 96 made everything different. Who knows what we'd even be sitting here talking about right now had he just re-signed with WWE in 96. Super Fluffy, thank you for the $5 as well. One of the best punches in pro wrestling. It's a lost art today. Rest in peace, Razor. Yeah, Razor had a good old right hand that was stolen from The Rock. Rock realized how good it was and took it. And I always liked Razor's punches. He just had great movements. He could sell offense. He was super agile for a big guy, and he was crazy strong. And he did have a really good look. So anyway, I figured we'd talk a little bit about Scott Hall and just discuss a little bit about his career. Now, he got started in the early 80s, and I think he got to start in Florida. I know Dusty helped train him. I know Barry Windham, Mike Rotundo all played a role kind of in his training. And back in those days, if you look at pictures of Scott Hall, he doesn't even resemble what the Razor Ramon character would be. He resembles more of a cowboy. He resembles more of a Magnum TA type. He had the mustache, that classic 80s mustache, the classic 80s hairy chest, and he had much more bushier hair that wasn't weighed down with the oil. And he was just a big guy, even bigger than he was by the time he came in as Razor and would be an outsider. He was way bulkier even back then, because he was probably just doing a lot of stuff that guys who lifted weights back in the 80s did, if you get my drift, and he looked amazing. So my first look at Scott Hall was AWA. That's the first time I ever saw him, was in the AWA. And there, you could tell, because Hogan was gone. Hogan had literally just left, I think, when Hall turned up there. Hogan might have been there at the end, but I'm pretty sure by the time Scott Hall got there, Hogan had been gone for probably a solid year. And they kind of made his character, he was kind of like a cowboy, or Big Scott Hall, Magnum, they called him Magnum Scott Hall, I think, as well. They almost seemed like they were trying to present him as a hybrid, as a mashup of Hulk Hogan and Magnum TA. It was kind of like he was the two of them together. It felt like that was the way he was presented. That's the way he was booked. And it was there that he, had his first meetings with Shawn Michaels and Marty Jannetty and Curt Hennig, and established those relationships. And he had turned up in WCW, I guess, in '89. Probably Dusty helped him get there, and he left for a bit, bounced around, returned in 91, and those were the Diamond Stud years. And I remember that's when I saw him for the first time in WCW, and I always thought as the Diamond Stud, it's just a shell kind of Razor Ramon, but he kind of still had the same look. He would wear the vest a lot, and by then he kind of was doing the deal with the hair, and I always thought he looked like a huge professional wrestling star, but he never really got over in any sort of way in WCW. Neither did Kevin Nash. And I know a couple of the times that Scott Hall stopped by WWE for tryouts, he left without a contract. I think he was there at least twice before he was brought in. So I don't know what it was about him that they were thinking he was lacking, because at least physically, and back then, how you looked physically was even more important than it is now, because, you didn't have to be AJ Styles in the ring back in the 80s. You didn't need that. You just had to be able to do something. And Scott Hall knew what he was doing. So I'm surprised that he was in the business 7 or 8 years before actually getting his break, because I thought he had not only the look, but he had the ability way before then. So after his WCW run as the Diamond Stud, he was doing the stuff with DDP and all sorts of shit. That's when he was finally brought into the WWE. They signed him to a deal. He came in kind of like in mid-92, and that's when they started running the vignettes for him. Remember? The Scarface type of vignettes where he's, down in Florida, and the Hey Yo and the Chico, and he's got the gold. And I remember thinking that he's going to be kind of a scary heel. I was a little bit concerned about him. I wasn't freaked out at first because I knew him. I knew he was the Diamond Stud, and I'm like, well, he wasn't doing shit in WCW, but the fact that they're giving him a character, they have vignettes for him, this seems like they're going to turn him into a big deal. And back then, if you remember, Bret Hart was WWE champion, so I was a little bit nervous. Well, by the time the vignettes aired, Bret wasn't champ yet, but he was about to be. So when Bret won the title, and I guess that was around the same time that Ultimate Warrior left the company, because Scott Hall or Razor Ramon, when he was brought in, they immediately teamed him with Ric Flair, and he was going to be they were going to take on, I think, Warrior and Macho Man at Survivor Series. But then Warrior left along with Davey Boy and that whole deal. Mr. Perfect came back to take his place, and I remember thinking at that time that it felt like WWE might have just been lacking big heels, because Razor had just got there. He had only had like jobber TV wins up until that point. It's not like he had created a huge track record or beaten any big baby faces or anything like that. He's just there and automatically teaming with Flair in a huge match. He's teaming with at the time, the WWE champion in a huge match at Survivor Series. And during that time, that's when Flair dropped the belt to Bret. They went in that direction, and then Scott Hall would have that match at Survivor Series. And on the other side of that was Kurt Hennig, a guy that he already has some history with from AWA. They were in that Wrestle Rock Rumble video together. Look that up if you've never seen it. And I always thought that was interesting, that, Hall and Hennig, they were a team, they were, a tag team in AWA. So I'm like, why aren't they together in a lot of ways? So I just found that to be an interesting match. And then I really got worried. Couple of months later, by this point, Bret Hart was champion. He has had successful title defenses on TV at Survivor Series, beating Shawn, and now it's Royal Rumble time, and he's got to defend the belt there, and they have him defend it against Razor Ramon. And I remember being so freaked out because in my mind, number one, I'm a huge Bret Hart fangirl, as you guys know, but also I am worried because I'm noticing WWE's the changes they're making. They're moving away from Flair and Savage and Hogan and Sid. Everybody that was over in the beginning part of 92 is gone or being shoved aside. So they need some new people. So when Bret Hart is scheduled to face Razor Ramon, I'm like, oh shit, they're going to put the belt on Razor Ramon and he's going to be this new heel champion. I didn't realize, of course, that they had planned for Yoko to win the Rumble, and then it all started making sense. But I was legit concerned that Bret Hart would drop the title to Razor Ramon at the Royal Rumble in 93. So upon him entering the company, I think they were running vignettes for him around SummerSlam of 92, but I'm not sure if he was in the ring yet. So basically, when he debuted, he was essentially in 2 pay-per-view main events, kind of back-to-back, 2 high-profile matches. That tag match at Survivor Series and then a WWE title match against Brett at the Rumble. So that was a huge start for him. And what's interesting about that is I don't even think he worked WrestleMania 9. I think he faced Backlund. I just don't remember if it was on the main card or maybe it was like on the undercard. So he came in super hot, but then Brett beat him and it cooled him off a bit until they got on the other side of WrestleMania. And then we had the big match at the Manhattan Center with his best bud, 1-2-3 Kid, who at that time was still showing up on WWE TV with a different name every week. He was the Lightning Kid. He was the Kamikaze Kid. Lightning Kid I had already seen on TV. He was working, I think, maybe Texas. He was on ESPN a lot. I just remember that prior to him coming in WWE. And he basically gave him he was the Kid, then he was the Lightning Kid, then I think he was a Kamikaze Kid, and then, of course, he hits the moonsault on Razor Ramon, pins him, scores a huge upset. They do the deal where Razor challenges him to rematches, and that's where they named him the 1-2-3 Kid. So Scott Hall putting over Sean Waltman, look at what it did for his career. Without that victory, do you think Waltman was always a great worker and stuff, but for that time he was so small and so young looking that it was hard to really take him seriously. He needed to beat a big opponent for anybody to even take him seriously at all. So without that win against Scott Hall, I don't know what would have became of him. And of course, then he was absorbed into the clique, and he had a lot of backstage power after that because of the friends that he made. And he turned out to be the measuring stick. Everybody that came in and needed a test, they stuck him in the ring with 1-2-3 Kid to see how he would do. Without Scott Hall putting him over that night in the Manhattan Center, who knows what would have become of the 1-2-3 Kid or Sean Waltman. So that whole deal then set in motion Razor Ramon's babyface turn. He went into the King of the Ring and lost the opening round match to Brett, was actually a really good match. But by then, everybody was giving him the 1-2-3 shit and the chants and everything in the crowd. And that's when I think it was Money Inc. or it was Ted DiBiase had started messing with him and giving him hell about it. And that's when Razor turned babyface and I believe faced Ted DiBiase in his final match at SummerSlam 1993 and beat him. And then he was a full-blown babyface. And during this time was when Sean got suspended for the positive drug test or the steroid test or something that came back positive. He was forced to be suspended, and that's when they ran the Battle Royal, where the final two guys in the Battle Royal would face the following week and crown the new Intercontinental Champion. Turned out to be Razor Ramon and Rick Martel. And I remember I watched this happen at the time. I watched both of those Raws live that night, those weeks. And I remember even during the Battle Royal, in the Battle Royal, I was like, it's going to be Razor. There's nobody else in this Battle Royal to me that really made sense because Razor was a heel. He had that run. He had just recently turned babyface. What a great way to build, a babyface star now. Put the Intercontinental title on him. It'll look great on him. And I was excited to see how the IC title looked on Razor Ramon. I was very confident that he would be the one to win it. And then when it turned out to be him and Rick Martel, I knew he was going to win it because even at that time, Martel really wasn't around. Martel was in and out. I don't even think he was under contract. He was brought in when needed. He worked some Rumbles here or there, but he wasn't a mainstay on TV, I don't think, really, probably past 1992. So once it was Scott and Martel, I'm like, oh, 100% Scott Hall. They do the match the following week. Of course, Scott Hall wins. And you could tell he was they gave him, and he was awarded the backup Intercontinental title because it was really gold looking and it was stiff. The leather hadn't been broken in yet. And I always thought that Scott Hall looked so good with that classic Intercontinental. He was one of the best ones to ever wear it. I think Scott, Brett, Perfect wore it the best. Maybe Sean, but Sean would change up the colors. I'm thinking like the classic, IC. I always associate that belt, with Brett and Perfect and Scott Hall. It looked so good on him. And, of course, that led to Shawn Michaels returning after the suspension. Now he's got his Intercontinental Championship belt with him as well, and that's when we do the double championship ladder match at WrestleMania 10, a pay-per-view we just watched a month ago live together. And that was the craziest thing I have ever seen, and I tried to put it over that night as we were watching WrestleMania 10. I said, based on like what we see now in wrestling, I just want to make sure I can be making sure everything looked okay over there. I was concerned. Anyway, I was trying to put over that night. I was like, I don't think anybody can really truly appreciate how unique, different, crazy this match was to see for a fan at this time, where if a set of 2022 eyeballs looks at that WrestleMania 10 match, I don't know. I mean, it's going to be good and everything, but are they going to say, oh, it's the greatest match I ever saw? Probably not, because they've seen so much crazy shit since 1994 up until now. But up until that point, I'm 17 years old, and I'm watching this match, and and all I've really seen is 4 years of the 90s and then a whole bunch of 70s and 80s wrestling. For a kid my age to see this was mind-blowing. I mean, moonsaults were still huge moves back in those days, and these guys are using the ladder. We never even seen a ladder match except for that little dry run that Shawn and Brett. It's on one of these Coliseum videos I have back here somewhere. And they had done a ladder match that was taped for Coliseum Video. I think Brett tells a story. It was basically just like a tryout to show Vince of this concept. And Brett's always been very bitter that they took that match away from him and gave it to Shawn and Razor. But I'm like, well, Brett, at least that match was for the Intercontinental title. What were you doing that night at WrestleMania 10? I think you should shut up. I'd rather be, celebrating with the Winged Eagle in Madison Square Garden to close out the show than working for the Intercontinental title on the undercard. Just saying. But I have no regrets that they gave that match to Razor and Shawn, because it was the greatest match I'd ever fucking seen. My jaw had dropped. My brain could not comprehend what I was seeing. And like I said, you go back and look at that match now, you're like, oh yeah, big deal. They throw the ladder at each other. You have to understand, you didn't see that at that time. It wasn't a regular thing. Now, every single Monday Night Raw, SmackDown, whatever, there's 19 fucking ladders underneath the ring just in case you need one. But back in the day, hell, even the ladder matches, there was only one ladder. I think they rectified that the next time they would do it in 95, but I'm pretty sure that night at Madison Square Garden, there was only one, and the ladder did bend and twist and break a little bit. So if it wouldn't have been usable, what would they have done? They would have had to go, I'm sure there was another ladder somewhere in Madison Square Garden, but they would have had to get one out there pretty quick. Now, they literally have 20 to 30 ladders per ladder match out there, which is insanity. But it was it was in its infancy. This was the beginning of the whole ladder match concept, and these two guys really got it off on and started it off right. And it would get crazier. I mean, I was lucky enough to be at SummerSlam 2000. I watched that three-way ladder match with those tag teams. They would take things to such enormous levels here after 1994, but you wouldn't have gotten to those levels had Scott and Shawn not done it first. So if you haven't seen this match, or you haven't watched it in a while, or you've never seen it, I don't know, go back and watch it. It's not all about, 630s and 450s and moonsaults and shit. It's about, how they use the ladder, the creativity that they, and the uniqueness and the unique offense they came up with during a time when you really never saw a ladder in a ring at all. And like we saw with the Bret Hart and Shawn trial run, I think they got rammed into the ladder a couple of times, but they really weren't using it as a full-blown weapon to the degree that Shawn and Razor were at WrestleMania 10. So that match was another match that I think in a lot of ways changed the direction of the business a little bit and changed basically the idea of coming up with match concepts that nothing is off limits, because a ladder match might seem routine to a modern fan, but proposing this in the 80s would have sounded crazy. It would have sounded crazy. Wait, what? Hang a belt up? What the fuck? A ladder? Were you crazy? It would have sounded nuts. So, and they were doing it a little bit in Stampede. That's where, the whole thing started. But that would have been a weird concept to do in like 1987 or 1988. I could never imagine Randy Savage and the Honky Tonk Man having a ladder match for the Intercontinental title. Maybe a guitar on a pole match, but a ladder match would have just been crazy. So, it probably came around right at the right time, now that the style of wrestlers, people were getting smaller, guys were getting more athletic. So matches like this were going to be super exciting. And it really was a game changer, this match at WrestleMania 10. It was. And WWE wanted to give this one back to us. I think it took a whole year. Later, now they're both babyfaces. Shawn is once again the Intercontinental Champion, this time as a babyface, but he would have to defend against Razor at SummerSlam 95 in another ladder match. And that one was even different because Razor had to, he was going in as the challenger, and then they also had that they had different rules in 95 than they did in 1994. So in that match at SummerSlam, you couldn't use the ladder as a weapon, apparently. So when you go back and watch it, they're not beating the shit out of each other with it the way they were at WrestleMania 10. And plus, it's a babyface match now with a lot less heat. You know, when it was the two of them fighting heel and babyface, they had a lot of interactions on TV, and then Shawn had attacked him a bunch of times and stuff. So there was a reason to want to kill each other. Now they're like buddies, they're clique members, and they have to go out there and try to fight with this, you know, big contraption. But a lot of fans loved that match. A lot of fans liked the 95 ladder match better than WrestleMania 10. I personally did not. I preferred WrestleMania 10, but I really did like this ladder match at SummerSlam. So, and it was supposed to be Sid. It was supposed to be Shawn and Sid, and Gorilla Monsoon, the fan-friendly president, switched it to Shawn and Razor. But if you backtrack a little bit, Razor Ramon also had that great SummerSlam moment in 1994 as well. After winning the ladder match at WrestleMania 10, he then dropped the IC title to his buddy Kevin Nash. Then they would have a rematch at SummerSlam 1994 with Walter Payton in Razor Ramon's corner. One of my favorite SummerSlam matches ever, Intercontinental title matches ever. It was fun. It was different than Brett and Perfect, but just to see the IC title on the line in a match that all the fans are on the edge of their seat. There's a lot going on. It was so exciting. It was a great finish. It was a great moment for Razor. He had big moments at WrestleMania 10 and SummerSlam that year. I mean, 1994 was Razor's year. It really was. He had a lot of great moments that year. So I think those 3 years in WWE, 93, 94, 95, were career-making years for Scott Hall. Those are the 3 years that got him that big money from WCW, the work that he put in, you know, during that time. So you now fast forward kind of near the end of his WWE run. He goes into the Royal Rumble in 1995, I guess, and drops the title to Jeff Jarrett. So I kind of fast forward a little bit when I was talking about the two ladder matches, but it would drop it to Jarrett. Jarrett would then drop it to Shawn at that In Your House, and that's where they would battle for the IC title again in the second ladder match at SummerSlam. And that's when Shawn got beat up by the cheerleaders in Syracuse and had to forfeit the title to Dean Douglas on a pay-per-view. But then Razor Ramon took Shawn Michaels' place and won the IC title back, holding the IC title into January of 1996, where he, of course, dropped it to Goldust. And the plan was for him to face Goldust at WrestleMania 12, although during that time, he had been offered a deal by WCW. He had asked Vince McMahon to match it, and Vince McMahon, of course, could not match it, so he was going to leave around the same time. It's a little shady as to what was going on there, but he was also suspended from WWE for conduct. I think it might have been a drug test. So he missed WrestleMania and missed his WrestleMania payday, but his contract was not up until May. You know, so during this time, Kevin Nash also had the deal, the cage match with Brett that really upset him. And then when Scott Hall told him what he was making in WCW, Nash decided to explore that as well. And he would stay on good terms with Vince, working Mania with Undertaker and then going into good friends, better enemies to job to Shawn on his way out. But Scott Hall would not come back until after WrestleMania. He had the pay-per-view match with Vader. Vader, ironically, going into the WWE Hall of Fame this year, and he put Vader over. Shawn beat Diesel, and then that was it for for Razor and Diesel on WWE TV. All they would do now was just work out their house show contracts, which, of course, ended in Madison Square Garden. And it seems like Scott Hall has been involved in some of the biggest incidents in pro wrestling. He really has, because that night after Diesel and Shawn work in the cage, of course, Hunter and Razor come to the ring. The four of them hug, do the curtain call, and it was a game-changing type of thing. Like I said, that curtain call, you know, led to Hall and Nash leaving, forming the NWO. Triple H got punished, allowing Austin to sneak in the back door and win the King of the Ring, thus cutting the 316 promo, which made him a huge star. So many things, so many things were changed with that curtain call. So it seems like every sort of big moment in wrestling, Scott Hall seems to be in the middle of it. And then, of course, that's when he would debut in WCW. And I just told the story at the beginning of the podcast here, sitting in the living room of my balls-hot first ever apartment that I ever lived in, just a year after graduating high school. And I'm sitting in there, and it's hot as hell, and I can hear the loud ass a window unit air conditioning that we had in there, and I can even remember the smell. And I'm watching my little Magnavox TV, 19 inches, and I've got it on Nitro, and here he comes. And we knew it, like I was calling the hotlines. I was aware that Hall and Nash were leaving and they were going to WCW, but I was just under the assumption that Hall and Nash would go to WCW. I did know at that time, I understood that they couldn't be Razor and Diesel, so I just assumed that WCW would slap stupid gimmicks on them because that's what they had been doing. When Boss Man came over, he was the boss, and they changed a lot of people's names, but kind of kept them the same type of deal. Earthquake was Avalanche, that type of thing. So I thought Razor, would just be Knife, or or Diesel would be Unleaded. I don't know. They would do something like that, is what I was assuming they would do. But the way Hall debuted, they made it clear right from the start. I think him coming through the crowd was brilliant. If he would have came through the aisle, it would have been dead. They had two. It was Mike Enos and like one of the Well Done guys was in there. And it was just some random ass match that nobody gave a shit about. And you can see, like, as you're watching the match, you can see Hall walking in the crowd. Finally the camera picks up on him, and he's wearing the jeans and the jean vest, and he hops over the barricade, and he's, got the razor hair, and he's got the toothpick, and he says the now infamous line, "You know who I am, but you don't know why I'm here." And then he starts talking about the Huckster and the Nacho Man and where's Billionaire Ted. And that right there set the tone. That told you what WCW's intention was. He was coming in as a WCW wrestler, referencing the characters that WWE was parodying on their show with the Billionaire Ted skits, and says that you want a war, you got one, because WCW was basically declaring war on WWE. And so they made it seem like Razor Ramon had shown up to say the war was on. And I think they could have gotten away with him not even being Razor Ramon, because he just said, you know who I am. Yeah, you do. So they were just going to be somebody else, but you knew kind of where they came from. And then, of course, it was the next week, or maybe this week after. I think Hall maybe showed up the next week too, talked some more smack to Sting or whatever it was, and then said, next week I got a big surprise or whatever. Can't remember how many weeks it was. But then, boom, Kevin Nash appeared, slapped Eric Bischoff on the shoulder, started talking about adjectives, and from there they would go on to challenge 3 of WCW's stars at Bash at the Beach, and our surprise buddy to be the number 3 guy was great. I think the pay-per-view before that was Great American Bash, was it? And that's when Bischoff had him out on the stage, and he point blank, because I think by this point I think WWE had filed lawsuit against WCW for Hall and Nash kind of using Razor and Diesel's likeness. Nash really wasn't doing it, but Hall definitely was, with the toothpick and the hair and the accent and all that. So Bischoff had to ask them on pay-per-view, do you work for WWE? And they were like, no, and forget about the past, Chico, and all of that. And that's when Hall says, you don't jack us around, and he punches him, and then Nash power bombs him through the table. It was great shit. You got to understand, for 1996, not regular stuff you saw. It was very strange to see Bischoff or Vince or anybody like that take a bump. This was a full year before Vince got stunned in the Garden. So this was still real new stuff, and it felt a little bit real. They legitimately did feel like outsiders coming in. Everything they were doing on Nitro, sitting in the crowd with their ticket, fighting off the cops, the entire locker room, heels and baby faces, all uniting against them. It was really, really well done. It was one of the only things WCW did right, and I think they just basically did it by accident. And it was all just perfect timing, the way their contracts ended with WWE at the same time. 2 of their biggest stars showing up together essentially on the competitions program exploded the business. So not only did that change everything from how we view wrestling, the audience now was starting to get a little bit older, because once Hall and Nash started the NWO, a lot of that stuff was real gnarly. You had spray paint cans, you had baseball bats, you had fans chucking shit in the ring, security guards, cops with guns, everything. It had everything. Where on WWE, it's TL Hopper versus Duke the Dumpster Drosy. It was completely, WWE was falling way behind. So not only was WCW changing the game in terms of, storylines and stuff, because prior to Hall and Nash getting there, their shit was hokey as hell too. Eric Bischoff likes to rewrite history a little bit with that, talking about how WCW liked to, be more reality based, where WWE's storylines were cartoony. Not really. That didn't happen until 1996. Prior to Hall and Nash coming in, their storylines were just as hokey and just as cartoony as WWE's. The Dungeon of Doom, the Zodiac, are you fucking kidding me? All the Blacktop Bully, all the stupid ass goddamn gimmicks that company had, avalanches and sharks. They were basically trying to recreate 80s WWE from 1994 to 1996. It wasn't until Hall and Nash got there and started the NWO that sort of booking philosophy changed. So Eric Bischoff is full of shit when he says that was their intention from the point when they got Hulk Hogan, is to be more reality-based. Bullshit. You were trying to tap into that WWE success from the 1980s is what you were trying to do. Hall really changed all of that when he came over. And that NWO angle couldn't have gone better. Hogan being the perfect heel. Who would have thought not only would Hogan be a good heel, he'd be the greatest heel of all time? My God. I mean, it really couldn't have gone better. And Hall was right in the middle of it. So like I said, not only did they change, how storylines are presented, how wrestling characters are presented, and what the main portion of the audience and the fan base that WCW is going to be targeting, not only did all of that change, but how wrestlers are paid was changed, because that was the beginning of the guaranteed money. Scott Hall and Kevin Nash knew, they understood that WWE from a wrestling perspective was smarter than WCW. They're probably going to get more over as characters and get more exposure in WWE, because WCW already had them. They didn't know what to do with them. They don't really feel like they would know what to do with them now either, but they're paying them all this money. How can you say no? So they just got real lucky. I think they went there because they had to. You can't turn away that money. Even if it's going to put you in stupid storylines and idiotic situations, you can't turn that money away. But when they got there, everything just worked so perfect, and Ted Turner had all this money. Eric Bischoff could just shell out any amount of money he wanted and basically steal anyone he wanted from Vince. And Vince knew that. So that was the beginning of the guaranteed money and the guaranteed contracts. And that got really out of hand in WCW, because Hall and Nash, they had clauses that we heard about, the favored nations deal, where, they could write in the contract that they have to be the highest paid. So if somebody else comes in and gets more, then they're bumped up to that amount. They signed extensions way earlier than they should have. Nash's claimed that WCW was so stupid they actually thought the fake Razor and Diesel was the real Razor and Diesel, and threw contract extensions at those guys for more money just to get them to stick around when they weren't going to leave anyway. Was kind of a funny story. So he was able to make a ton of money, and you can't really blame him. He's told the story time and time again. I didn't want to leave WWE. I went to Vince and said, I've been here for 3 years. I've been wrestling and improving, so I want to keep going. I've stopped. I've noticed that not only is my status on the card plateaued, so is my pay. So what can we do? And Vince is like, well, nothing. I'm kind of happy where you are, and I just like to re-sign you to the same deal. Can't do that now that there's competition, and you can't do that now that there's somebody out there willing to pay. WWE might find themselves in a little bit of that situation now with AEW too. If they just want to have somebody just flounder and do whatever, they better be prepared for that person to possibly walk when their contract is up. So Scott was like, okay, well, WCW's offering me this. Can you match it? Whatever the number was at the time, $750,000 or whatever it was. It was a lot. Sting money is what Scott Hall used to say. And Vince, of course, couldn't match that. It was like triple what he was paying him. So you can't blame Scott Hall for going to WCW, because they're going to guarantee that he's going to make 3 times more than he made last year in WWE. And back then, Vince wasn't about the guarantee. Vince was about the opportunity. Vince hated to have guaranteed contracts. He fought it as long as he could, but now that WCW was around, this forced him to lock up talent where they couldn't screw him over. He'd already been screwed over before by Lex Luger. This just happened a few months before. And now Hall and Nash are leaving, and of course Rick Rude would come in the following year and kind of do the same thing after the screw job. He would lose Brett. I mean, WCW was just punching down on WWE for so long there. And because of the strength of that NWO angle, it pretty much almost ended. Hall and Nash almost left and put their old employer completely out of business with that angle. They came within a hair of doing it, before things started unraveling behind the scenes. in WCW. But that NWO run, changing the business in terms of storylines and audience participation and all of that stuff, and changing things behind the scenes for all the boys who are now going to have a little bit more of a guarantee, maybe a little bit more financial security, and they're going to be able to leverage themselves against the competition to get the best deal possible. And that's really when the money started. And, a lot of wrestlers owe that to Scott Hall and Kevin Nash for leaving back in those days. It was, it's amazing when you think about it. Had none of that ever happened, what would be going on, what the business would look like now had they stuck around. We've always done what ifs with the screw job. Oh, if the screw job never happened, that one makes me really sad, because if the screw job never happened, I fully believe Owen Hart would be alive right now. But with Hall and Nash leaving, with the curtain call never happening, we might not have gotten Stone Cold Steve Austin. We definitely wouldn't have gotten the NWO. Wrestling would have continued on that childish, hokey path to where the older I got, the more interest I would probably lose. And I've said this before a million times. I personally was at the perfect age. I am the perfect age to be a wrestling fan. I have hit the wrestling fan lottery. I'm the best age. Anybody that's within 2 or 3 years of age 44 is at the best age, or maybe even 5 years, is at the best age to be a wrestling fan. I was a kid during the rock and wrestling era, during the ice cream bars and the cartoon and the Hogans and, all these, larger than life cartoon type characters of the 1980s. And then I was kind of still a kid, but an early teen during the hokey days of WWE and, some of their silliness in the early 90s there, the Berserker and Tatanka and guys like that. But I had my Bret Hart. I still had my Bret Hart, and there was a lot of wrestlers there of the new generation, like the Shawn Michaels and other guys that were starting to get my attention. And then by the time we got to the Attitude Era, by the time we got to the NWO, now I'm 20. Now when we're into the Attitude Era, now I'm 21, 22, 23. I'm going to wrestling shows during the Attitude Era when I'm in my mid-20s. How fucking perfect is that? And then when I get a little bit older, then when I mature, that's when John Cena comes around. The only problem is now the fans that were younger than me before, who were too young to watch the Attitude Era, who had to go to bed before Stone Cold came out and started passing out middle fingers, now they're old enough to appreciate more adult-oriented content, but WWE has gone the other way, and now they've gone backwards and gone PG and had John Cena. And I've said time and time again, that's what made the fans so mad, is because they're finally old enough to appreciate more adult-oriented content, and WWE has gone back to giving them cartoony shit. They're just frustrated, that's all. They're not as lucky as me. So, I was really able to experience the best parts of pro wrestling at the best age. And here, when we get to a weird part of WWE where it's PG and silly, well, now I'm an old man. I don't give a fuck. They can be as silly as they want. Yes, obviously they annoy me, but I was old enough to where I was mature enough to appreciate John Cena and what he gave to the WWE and what he needed and what they needed after the Benoit stuff. So, when I think back to the NWO and I think about Scott Hall, Kevin Nash, Hulk Hogan forming that group in WCW and their run, those memories are tattooed on my brain for life, because I remember where I was during a lot of those Nitros and a lot of those pay-per-views when the NWO was on top. I remember exactly where I was, how it smelled, how it looked, what the weather was like, everything. That was all, super memorable stuff. Shaped me as a wrestling fan. I don't think you'd be watching good micro commentaries right now had it not been for all that stuff. I would have probably been long checked out. Like I said, if there was never that move and Hall and Nash stayed put in WWE and they continued along that, both companies did. They continued along that line of silly characters and dumb stuff. I eventually would have grown tired of it. I eventually would have gotten into my early 20s and I wouldn't have cared to watch a school teacher fight a plumber. I wouldn't care. But luckily for me, wrestling changed and the Attitude Era started, and Austin and Rock and Foley and Taker and Kane and all this crazy shit was happening on WWE Raw right at the best age to watch that type of stuff. So I hate to brag, but I am definitely the best age to be a wrestling fan, and I have so many memories of everything Scott Hall did in all different chapters of his career. So his WCW time was a hoot. He would do a lot of stuff there win multiple tag team championships with Kevin Nash. He had a run with the U.S. title, right? He had a run with the television title even, I think. Never won the world title, though, and Scott Hall's name is always mentioned in the list of greatest wrestlers to never hold a world championship. I always keep Scott Hall right on that list, along with Roddy Piper, along with Owen Hart, and along with Kurt Hennig. To me, they're the top four. You can maybe throw Bulldog in there, maybe a few others, but those four really stand out to me as wrestlers who you're like, yeah, why didn't they win the championship? Especially Scott Hall, I could see, maybe not in WWE. Maybe if he stayed there in 96 and he kept his shit together, maybe in late 96 or 97, he'd be world champion. But I'm really surprised that they didn't do it in some of the later years of WCW, like when Jarrett came in. Why would you put the title on Jarrett and not Hall? But it probably had a lot to do with as well where Scott Hall was, in his personal life as well. And they did the angle in 98, with the alcohol angle with him and Scott Hall. I think they worked Halloween Havoc that year. I remember not loving that. They would even kind of do something similar in WWE. But as WCW kind of started dying there, Hall and Nash, stuck around. Hall, I think, had some stints in rehab during that time. And then, of course, in 2001, WWE purchased WCW, ending the entire Monday Night War. And Scott Hall was one of those names that sat out his contract, and he would wait nearly a full year to come into WWE along with Hogan and Nash in 2002 when they came in to reform the NWO. And that was basically, right from the word go, a complete disaster. It was very surreal to see the NWO in a WWE ring, especially the Hogan and Rock stuff, but Scott Hall coming in, I was happy to see Razor back, but it felt off, and you knew Scott Hall wasn't in a good place. And he had the WrestleMania match against Steve Austin, which was good. I always said nobody sold a Stone Cold Stunner quite like Scott Hall and Shane McMahon. Holy shit. And gave Austin a pretty good match, but Austin wasn't happy with the spot on the card. He, of course, would leave, take his ball, and go home. And then shortly after that, or shortly before that, actually, was the plane ride from hell, which would wind up costing Scott Hall his job. That was documented pretty recently, too, in the Vice documentary not long ago. So we all heard about the problem Scott Hall had on that flight. He would be let go, and that would really be the end of what I consider to be Scott Hall's in-ring career. I didn't really pay attention to any of his runs in TNA or anything he did there. I do know he wrestled a little bit there, but in my mind, Scott Hall has been out of the ring now for 20 years. This year is 20 years since that WrestleMania match against Austin at WrestleMania 18. Hell, we might be on the 20th anniversary of that, like really soon, whatever the date on WrestleMania 18 was. So that's why I think there's a lot of fans that, probably don't remember or know much about like classic Scott Hall because he hasn't been in the ring in 20 years. But his influence and the way his situation changed the business in so many different ways. He was such a staple of that 90s WWE, and then being right in the dead center of the monumental shift that wrestling went through in, 96 and into the Attitude Era and the Monday Night Wars. He was plopped right in the middle of it, and he started it. I called him yesterday on Twitter. You could argue that he is the godfather of modern pro wrestling because nothing was the same after the day he came out in that denim outfit on Nitro. The minute he said, "You know who I am," not one goddamn thing has been the same since. It's been so different. Wrestling has been on such a different path. It was literally just going straight, and the minute he came on Nitro, just turned the corner and went in a completely different direction. We weren't even expecting it, and it was awesome. And, we wouldn't have had that had it not been for Scott Hall. He's synonymous with that. So his run in WWE in 2002, it was nice to see him back there in a homecoming situation, but of course, he had a lot of problems. That's not really, that memorable of a run. And of course, they were doing the alcohol deal with him there too. I think Austin was pouring beer on him and shit during their deal, so that wasn't very fun. And like I said, not too familiar with anything that he did in TNA. I know he was there in the early 2000s, and then he was there, I guess, near the end, like kind of at the end when they... when Hogan and Bischoff came in and they were on that inaugural TNA edition, but Hall was in a bad place then. And he pretty much hit rock bottom, about as rock bottom as you can hit. And the footage came out of him at that indie event. Jake Roberts has a similar situation where they're booked for an indie event and they just came out plastered. Hall looked like, He looked like he was Muhammad Ali, like he couldn't even walk or see. He was just so frail, and they tried to roll him in the ring. He didn't know what was going on. He was so messed up. And was it 2011? Was that when the ESPN, the E60 doc was done, where it kind of chronicled Scott Hall's problems, his heart issues, and his many stints in rehab, and how much money WWE spent on him trying to get him clean? And they also talked about his life, and one thing that not many people knew about Scott Hall, or maybe perhaps even know now, is that Scott Hall has also had to carry around the fact that he murdered a man in 1983. And there was a scuffle, a guy with a gun outside of, I think it was a nightclub in Florida somewhere. And they wrestled for the gun, and Hall was able to take it away from him, and he wound up shooting him and killing him. And it was all in self-defense. He was charged, I believe, with second-degree murder, but they dropped the charges due to lack of evidence and the fact that it wasn't even his gun. He took the gun away from the guy. So he admits in that documentary that he's carried that around, not yet necessarily using it as an excuse for his drug and alcohol use, but definitely that's something that's got to weigh on your mind, as sure as shit would weigh on mine. So the guy had, for all of his success and all the wonderful moments and memories he created in wrestling, he had a really tumultuous and traumatic life that was constantly battling, divorces and alcoholism and drug addiction and rehab and things like this, where he, had that unfortunate incident in 1983, and he had to carry that around with him all the time. So, I can understand somebody turning to a crutch or drugs or alcohol to maybe perhaps cope with that. So, he basically said in that documentary that he really never got over that. And who would get over that? I wouldn't, even if you were completely justified in what you did, taking another human life is not something that you're just going to be able to just put in the back of your mind. No, it's something you're probably going to think about every day. And he had to. So you feel for that, you feel bad that's just an unfortunate situation in general. Should have never happened. The entire fight shouldn't have happened. It just sucks. And it was around this time, I suppose, right around the time of that documentary, that I believe DDP reached out to Scott Hall around the same time he was reaching out to Jake the Snake Roberts, and got both of them to agree to move into his house, got him on the yoga program, and got them clean. And it took a while, but Hall cleaned himself up. I think it was like 2 or 3 years went by, and that's when Triple H decided to say, "Hey, keep it going, buddy." And he dangled that Hall of Fame in front of him, say, "Get yourself cleaned up," and that's absolutely something we can do, because Razor Ramon would have been in the Hall of Fame in 2004 if he would have been clean and sober, you know what I mean? So I think him being able to finally go in and get that was really cathartic for the fans in a lot of way too, because it wasn't something, I just loved seeing him up there, that white suit. He was tanned, he looked great. And I just remember being like, I am so grateful that we get to see him doing this. WrestleMania 30 was a crazy weekend, to be able to see that success story, Scott Hall, after things were about as bleak and as dark as you could ever imagine, for him to be standing there being honored in the WWE Hall of Fame on the same weekend that The Undertaker's streak ended, and the same weekend that Daniel Bryan was launched in the main event of WrestleMania, and the same weekend that the Ultimate Warrior passed away right after his Hall of Fame induction. 2014 was a crazy year. But for him to go in to the Hall of Fame, for me, was just super, super relieving, because I'm like, I'm just so happy that this didn't turn out to be a tragedy, when all signs were pointing to that was going to be the only end for him. You worry like that. We worried about that with China. We worry about that right now with Sonny. It's like you almost just kind of know that it's going to end badly. It's just gonna. And I'm so happy that we turned out to be wrong with Scott Hall, and he got to have that moment going into the Hall of Fame. It was great. It was great. Closed out with the great line that we all remember. Kevin Owens, shout out to Kevin Owens. Little tribute to the line tonight on Monday Night Raw when he was talking to Seth Rollins. And Scott Hall says, "Bad times don't last, but bad guys do." And he was right. He got over his bad times. There was a lot of them, but they didn't last. He got to the point where, he was able to overcome that. And like I said, for the most part, be clean and sober. I still think Scott Hall struggled a little bit during the time. I don't believe he was on Twitter at the end, but when he was, he had some strange things to say sometimes. And there was a few times where, I thought he might just be in his living room by himself, maybe getting hammered or something. But, for the most part, he was able to clean himself up and live life for another 10 years, because this was all going on about 10 years ago now. So I feel like he gave himself, and he gave all of us, a decade-long present, a decade-long bonus time that we weren't expecting to get with him. And, all those days to me are precious. I'm glad that we were able to see him go into the Hall of Fame. I'm glad we were able to see him on some of those Monday Night Raw homecomings and doing stuff with DX and documentary shit or anything with the Click. He was out there a few times in the Hall of Fame, right? I know Kevin Nash went in and, so I know he's done a lot of appearances with the Click together where they're all together in their old age. And to me, that always brought a smile to my face because you see the early days, the early pictures of the Click from 25 years ago, up until yesterday, all 5 of them were alive when at least 3 of them shouldn't be. I mean, Michaels and Waltman and Hall put an enormous amount of drugs in their body. I think Nash kept it a little more balanced. And then, of course, Triple H was, pretty much straight edge through all of that. So the fact that we were able to get those Hall of Fames and see them all together, I'm like, could easily be the other way. There could easily just be 2 Click members standing here. So the fact that we got all 5 of them, to me was a gift. And Scott Hall's career was a gift. I remember every single minute of his career. It was very influential to me as a wrestling fan. It was a big part of my wrestling memories because Scott Hall was all over the place. He was all over the TV in the 90s. He was pretty much on TV every Monday, for most of the decade of the 90s in one company or another, holding championship gold across both and, kind of being a legendary figure. Not everybody's perfect. Scott Hall was a flawed man. Scott Hall had plenty of people who didn't like him behind the scenes. Scott Hall was a Click member, so he's going to have natural heat from that. There are unsavory stories about Scott Hall floating around in shoot interviews and podcasts. Nobody's debating or denying that. We're here to talk about Scott Hall, what he did in wrestling, his influences, and, what it meant to us. Nobody is perfect, and I'm sure there are mistakes made personally and professionally that all wrestlers wish they could go back and have and do again. But we've seen that with Shawn Michaels. We've seen that with a lot of guys in the business that are complete assholes, maybe even a lot worse than Scott Hall. Scott is a guy that does seem to get along with everybody, but he's also a guy that just doesn't put up with any shit either, and he'll troll you and he'll rib you. And he doesn't seem like a guy and he was a guy that could take care of himself. So he was big enough and strong enough and intimidating enough to where he could basically do or say whatever he wanted. And he didn't give a shit about anybody. Or anything, he had his friends. Otherwise it was a business for him. And that's pretty much why he left WWE to begin with, is because you can't not go where they're offering you triple the money. You know what I mean? It's out of your hands at this point. So there's a lot to respect, I think, about Scott Hall, his wrestling career, what he did, the path he went on, and the game-changing angle that he was in the NWO. It's now been 26 years this summer since the NWO was formed. It's, I think, equally as still just as influential and significant today as it has ever been. And I think 100 years from now, people always look back at that is about as big as wrestling will ever get. I don't think it'll ever achieve what it achieved when it was doing that, when the NWO was doing their thing in WCW, while at the same time Austin starting to bubble in WWE. It'll never be that big again. I can never imagine them getting to that point unless, you do fast forward 50 years in the future where so many of this stuff is buried now and forgotten. You can maybe start recreating some of it. But, in terms of where the business was from 96 to 2000, I got to be ages 20 through 24 during those years. So lucky me, right? But those were the days, man. And that's probably where, Scott Hall made his biggest mark, was during those NWO years. And like I said, back in the WWE years, ain't too many guys that look better with that classic Intercontinental gold, especially when he had gold dripping from his neck, and now he's going to have gold around his waist. Gold everywhere on Scott Hall. So anyway, I've been flapping my gums about Scott Hall long enough. I'm going to cruise over here to the chat now, answer some more super chats that have been rolling in, see if you guys have interesting ladder matches memories. I just read ladder match in the chat. Interesting memories of Scott Hall to share. And then we will probably get out of here. Like I said, keep smashing that thumbs up button for Scott Hall. If you are not a subscriber, Please subscribe. We are here every Monday night, usually doing a review of Monday Night Raw unless Raw sucks. We're here every Wednesday watching Dynamite together. We're here most Sundays watching classic pay-per-view reviews. And we got podcasts every Saturday and also a lot of little videos in between. So make sure you are a subscribing person, please. Let me scroll up here, knock out the supers, and then see what else you guys have to say. I think the last one I got was Super Fluffy. And I have missed Mike Maxon. Appreciate the 5 from you, my friend. One of the few that didn't need a title to be great. No, he didn't. He had that gimmick. He had that character in Razor, in Razor Ramon, but championships didn't hurt. And I always think that Hall was a guy that looked really good with gold, even, regardless of what company he was in. But specifically, like I told the story of when he was in the Battle Royal in 93, I remember as a fan being so excited. I'm like, oh, he's going to win this. I was 100% convinced it was going to be Razor Ramon, and I could not wait to see him come out on TV with the Intercontinental title. I just thought he was going to look really good in it, and he did. One of the best guys to wear a championship. He just always looked good in gold, always. Chris Miner, appreciate the $5 from you. Hey, yo, Greg, I remember when WWE Network was debuting, my mom back home got it just to see Razor inducted into the Hall of Fame. That's right. That was the year it debuted, was 2014. He was her favorite. R.I.P. Chico. Yeah, he was he could get over with casual wrestling fans. One of my roommates didn't really watch wrestling, but always got a kick out of Razor. And he would always say the same thing. He would say, "Is that Chico?" And I'm like, "His name's not Chico." But he thought his name was Chico. Razor he was memorable to people who maybe didn't watch wrestling. You got to look at that guy and heard him talk. You'll probably chuckle a little bit. You know what I mean? Let me see who is next. What's up, DJ Scandalous? Good to see you in here as well. Yeah, just reading through some of these. Yeah, I agree with Ronnie. He definitely should have been a world champion at least once. I think he deserved that. But, like I said, there's also a lot of guys that have that accolade as well that should have gotten the title once and never did. So at least he's in some really good company there, because I think Kurt Hennig was every bit as good in the ring and capable of being a world champion as Scott Hall was. So was Owen. So was Piper. But they never really found the gold. Man, Deshaun Robinson, appreciate that $10 from you earlier on, my friend. Scott Hall, hey, yo. Hey, Rock, do you and that traitor Hogan want some of Hall and Nash tonight? The Rock, what you say, Chico? Hey, yo, Chico, Big Daddy Bitch, The Rock, imitating Nash Truck. Oh, yeah, when he did the I do like the first interaction. I don't know if it was the first interaction. I think it was when Rock was backstage with the NWO and Hogan wanted the picture or whatever. And then he starts going off on him, and he goes, "You, Razor Ramon, Chico," and then he does the to Diesel. Oh, that was great. I was actually happy that the NWO had to come in, because those guys coming into the locker room now, they weren't going to have the pull. I mean, Scott Hall and Nash, they were brave to go back into that locker room because there may have been some guys there that they might have held back during the time when they were in Vince's pocket. But now they're going to be the ones bethey pushed around. They don't have any, sort of control or power anymore. And that was probably really liberating for a lot of wrestlers that, could just basically say whatever they wanted to them. So seeing Rock kind of cut him down to size like that was really fun. I'm like, oh yeah, Razor and Diesel, things have changed a bit since last time you were here. Back in 96, you didn't have this motherfucker walking around. You didn't have Austin either. If you guys did, you might have been in a world of shit. Good stuff. Terry Allen Jr., appreciate the $2 from you. Was Scott a hero character when he was Lone Wolf? I don't know. I don't think so. I don't think he was trying to be a hero back then. I think he was just trying to be, he was by himself. Like everybody kind of had abandoned him. Is that what they were kind of doing in WCW when he was the lone Wolfpack member? Because everybody distanced himself from him. That's the way I think it went. I don't really remember. Neon Dreamer, thank you for that. Been a subscriber since the build up to WrestleMania 28. What are we on now? WrestleMania 38? Holy shit. Crap. I'm so glad you've been here for a decade, my friend. Thank you for that. Okay, March 17th was WrestleMania 18, so that will be, I guess, on Thursday, will be the 20-year anniversary of one of Razor's last matches. And I'm trying to think, Razor was never in a Royal Rumble, correct? Because he defended the Intercontinental title every year. In 93, he faced Brett. 94, he defended. 95, he defended. 96, he defended. All 3 years. And then He was actually in 97, but it was the fake razor. And then when he came back in 02, he came back 1 month after the Rumble, only to be let go, 4 months later or whatever. So yeah, he never got to compete in a Royal Rumble. Isn't that weird? And his WrestleMania matches aren't great either. Well, I guess I should take that back. The WrestleMania 10 match was fantastic, but 11 was forgettable. 12, he was suspended. And then, of course, he worked with Austin and lost at 17. So some of those big pay-per-views, he's Mr. Summers. He's got some SummerSlam memories, but not many other ones. Let me see. Terry Allen, I did get that one. Who's the next? JJ Leg. Appreciate that $2 from you, my friend. Scott Hall, Memorial IC title ladder match at Mania. Are you the one that tweeted me that? I actually think that's a really good idea if they did that every year, because sometimes they forget the Intercontinental title is even there. Sometimes it's not even defended at WrestleMania. Back in the day, it used to look forward to that title being defended at WrestleMania. So if you did a ladder match every time, I worry that might be too much with the Money in the Bank that they already do, but at least it would ensure you having a significant championship match for the Intercontinental title at every WrestleMania. And if you made it a multi-man ladder match every time, I'm not really against that. I could foresee problems with it, but on the surface, I actually think it's a really good idea. The problem is WWE would fuck it up, and if what they did to the Andre the Giant Battle Royal is any indication at all, the Intercontinental Memorial ladder match, what do you give it? 2 years, and they'll have that shit on the kickoff show? So, if they could treat it like a big deal every year, which I don't see why they couldn't, especially now with 2 nights of WrestleMania, if they were to make that a staple of WrestleMania every year, I certainly would be in favor of it. It would put the Intercontinental Champion at that time in a tight spot. Every year, you might not want to be Intercontinental Champion going into WrestleMania because you've got to defend the belt in a goddamn ladder match. And what if Omos is champion going into one of those WrestleManias? By the way, he wrestled Commander Aziz tonight, probably the best match Omos has ever had. He picked that bastard up, basically deadlifted him into a suplex and slammed him down. Damnedest thing I've ever seen. Fucking crazy. But if Omos is in something like that, that would make it tough. But a Scott Hall Memorial IC title ladder match, I think would be a cool idea. He did win that ladder match. Maybe one day when Sean passes away, you could incorporate Sean into it or whatever. But, if you tried that, I say it would be a good idea. I just don't trust WWE to make it special. If they can't make Andre special, they're not going to bend over backwards to make Scott special. You know what I mean? So the fact that they completely destroyed that Andre the Giant Battle Royal, I marked out for that 2014. There we go again, right back to that year. When they announced that, I'm like, holy shit, maybe things are starting to turn around. Like there's things happening that I wasn't expecting to see. WWE literally looks like they're about to put the championship on somebody that the fans want in Daniel Bryan. And now we've got this Andre the Giant Battle Royal. I'm an old man. I watched every single one of these WrestleManias from the beginning. I was a kid when Andre the Giant was winning these Battle Royals left and right as a babyface. So we had a Battle Royal at WrestleMania 2 that Andre won. We had a Battle Royal at WrestleMania 4. We had one at 14. There's been some Battle Royals at WrestleManias before, and to have one tributing Andre and to do it every year and to make it a big deal, a simple match concept that goes back decades and decades and decades, something that's not crazy like a ladder match or a Hell in the Cell or an Elimination Chamber, just a simple, basic battle royal used as a tool to get somebody over or to give somebody a little nudge. And when Cesaro won the very first one, I was like, holy shit, this is going to be fucking great. He's going to be a huge star now. The Andre Battle Royal is something we're going to look forward to every year. Almost instantly, it was a joke. So a Scott Hall ladder match, memorial ladder match every year, I think WWE can't do it. I think they're too stupid to do it right. So that's the only reason, JJ, why I think it wouldn't work. But the idea is phenomenal. Maybe AEW can do it. Maybe AEW can do a Scott Hall memorial ladder match every year at Double or Nothing or something. I don't know. But WWE, all they will do is ruin it. Yeah, you got to think about who the Intercontinental Champion is this year. It's Ricochet. It seems that he's going to be going into WrestleMania as champion. It sounded like a ladder match is something they actually had in mind for this year. So maybe they could just dedicate this year's ladder match to Scott Hall and not make it an annual thing. Because Honestly, there's a lot of guys you could dedicate a ladder match to. You could dedicate one to Sean, and you could dedicate a ladder match to anybody in those tag teams back in the day. Edge, Christian, Jeff Hardy, Matt Hardy, any of those guys could have a ladder matches dedicated to them. I think Hall, you can make a case for him because he was arguably the one that started it all, and perhaps even the most famous, and the most famous one. So I don't know. Yeah, Sean is in good health. I don't think Sean's going to pass away anytime soon. Nobody wants him to pass away. He's been doing a pretty good job there in NXT, and a lot of being able to learn under Shawn Michaels. That's just like, Michael Jordan just running a basketball camp, and you just go in there and learn from him every day how to shoot baskets and shit. So if you're there learning under Shawn, you're probably going to get some good advice. Oh man, DJ Scandalous, I hear you, man. I do not understand why they change and make belts so ugly. I absolutely despise the belt that they have now. And it's not even a belt like the world titles where you got that big ugly WWE logo in the middle of it. It's just ugly. So if you're going to do that, why not just do that? I mean, is it because they don't own the design? I know that's a Reg Park belt. We've seen this design in other promotions before. ECW's tag team titles used to be the same shape as the IC. But it's got so much history in it, for an old fan like me, just to see that belt back would be so fun. Hey, maybe if Cody comes back, he'll bring it with him. But if they did some sort of segment on TV, Ricochet could cut a promo and be like, I grew up with Razor Ramon. He was very influential to me, even though their styles are completely different. And I think I'd like to honor him by re-debuting the old Intercontinental, and he unveils it and he wears it, and it's got the black strap, not the white one. Fuck the white one. And wears that old school IC. I think it would be great. But will WWE do it? No. Of course not. You know why they won't do it? Because it would be awesome. If it's going to be awesome, don't expect WWE to do it. Do not expect it. Nice to read all of these well wishes here to Scott's family and stuff. I really feel, too, for people like Sean Waltman. I mean, he's been through a lot, too. He's had issues with drug and alcohol and, perhaps depression. He's, lost a lot of people. So you got to feel for them, and really hope that they're holding up during all of this and they don't, they don't have any issues or perhaps relapses. I mean, this can be very depressing. Sean Waltman was pretty vocal today on Twitter, because I think he was reading a lot of rest in peace wishes that he felt was premature. Because I was still awake when I saw Kevin Nash's statement. This would have been, I guess, maybe like 1:30 in the morning for me here in California, which would have put like 4 a.m. for the East Coast. So as soon as Kevin Nash let us know that they were going to suspend the life support, I went ahead and put my stuff together last night. I got my thumbnail ready. I put all this together thinking I was going to come up before Raw and do a stream on the passing of Scott Hall. But as the day went by, he was still alive. And even Waltman said, can you guys cool it with the rest in pieces and all that until my friend's heart actually stops beating? And they pulled him off life support. He lived for like 4 to 6 hours or something like that. So I didn't want to put a link up. There was no way I was going to put a link with a big thumbnail that says rest in peace Scott Hall until it was official. But I had, until Raw, I had no idea what I was going to do tonight. I was like, well, if Cody shows up, I guess it'll be a combined video, Raw review and Scott Hall. But if Cody doesn't show up, I really don't want to spend too much on Raw tonight because I don't care. I care more about just talking about Scott Hall and Razor Ramon and all that stuff. So that's what we did. But I didn't really know what kind of video I was even going to do today because we didn't know the status of Scott Hall. We didn't know any of that stuff until Monday Night Raw went on the air. And I'm pretty sure, because I was glued to the internet today, I had Twitter pulled up and I had the internet pulled up, and anybody that I think would get the news of Scott Hall's death first, I was kind of eyeballing them. Heard nothing from anybody. And then Raw opened up tonight with the In Memory of Scott Hall graphic. So that was pretty much our confirmation that he was in fact passed away. But that's typical Razor, though, pull the plug on him and, kicks out. And finally it took 6 hours for him to officially pass away or whatever it turned out to be. So, he fought till the end, and, he was a warrior. And like I said, we should at least, even though today's a super, super, super duper sad day, I think we should all be happy that we got the time with him that we did. I'm glad that he didn't pass away when he was at rock bottom in 2011. Like I said, I met him on the Jericho Cruise. I even have a video of the interaction, and, he took the time to talk to everybody, just super happy, super good spirits. And, just seemed to be mentally in a pretty happy place overall. And that made me real happy to see that he was able to be out on a ship, on a cruise, surrounded by all this temptation and still, just have his shit together. Jake was there too. DDP was there to monitoring both of them, I'm pretty sure. But they seemed really happy. He seemed really happy. And that was only 2 years ago. So it's unfortunate that things happened and turned out so tragic in the end, that he died unexpectedly. But, like I said, at least we got the time with him that we did. And I certainly wouldn't I'd take this any day over having memories that ended in 2011 with him being at absolute rock bottom and in pure misery during this time. Hopefully he's made peace with himself. He's made peace with his family. I know he has a son, Cody. I know he's got a daughter. His relationship, I know, with Cody has been strained a couple of times. I'm really hoping that they were at a good place as well when this happened. So yeah, you just your heart goes out to his family and everybody, and especially a lot of those Click members. Triple H. Everybody's at least said something today, and they all seem like they're hurting pretty bad here. So anyway, our best goes out to everybody affected directly by the Scott Hall passing, his friends and family, and then of course all of us, the fans who, we feel like he's family, especially someone like me. I've watched him for 30 years. You kind of feel like you get to know somebody, even if it's only through, mostly through a TV screen, other than one or two other, personal interactions. Other than that, it's just what you see on TV, but you see this person so much. I don't have many wrestling memories without Scott Hall in it. I have very few, before Scott Hall got into the business, and, he's pretty much been somebody who's been discussed at length constantly, even years beyond his in-ring days, just due to the hugeness of the NWO angle and how big that was for the business and whatnot. So yeah, he's definitely somebody that's going to go down as a super influential person, but not for the same reasons that other guys go down as being influential. Some guys go down, like Rey Mysterio, I believe, might be overall the most influential wrestler ever, because I think he was the guy that really got the ball rolling on the lucha style here in the States and started making smaller wrestlers more and more common, to the point now where you can be 110 pounds technically and be a fucking wrestler if you want to. And that would have never been the case back in the day. So a guy like Ray is very influential. A guy like Jericho is very influential. And a guy like Scott Hall is very influential for how he changed modern wrestling in terms of storylines, contract negotiations, all that stuff really took a turn with the defection of Scott Hall and Kevin Nash to WCW. It's sad. It sucks for me. I hate it every time we go through something like this, because there's so much of my wrestling memories. It feels like part of that dies too. And I never like to hear about people that I grew up with. And there was such a huge part, of my young life to watch them die. A piece of you dies. And we've talked about that for years. I've brought up Eddie Guerrero many times with you guys, how I feel that Eddie Guerrero, I feel like is the generation below me. It's their Owen Hart. I think a lot of people are so affected by the Eddie Guerrero death because he died when you were young, and he died in the middle of his career when he was an active wrestler. By the time Eddie did that, I had personally, as a wrestling fan, already been through that a dozen fucking times. I was already numb to it by the time Eddie passed. But that was the first time, I think, for a lot of fans that they really, truly got to experience a loss that heavy, because maybe they were too young when Owen passed away, or when Pillman passed away, or Eddie Gilbert, or the Von Erichs, or Bruiser Brody, or any other previous tragedy that we had before this. Eddie was the one that, I think just really shattered the hearts of an entire generation of wrestling fans, so guys like this, when there's going to come a time when, even though I think Ric Flair and Hulk Hogan are shitheads, their careers were extremely important to me as a fan. And when the day comes, they're not here anymore. It leaves a void. Even as a fan, it still leaves a void. It's totally okay to still grieve if you're nothing but a fan. You have every right to grieve, because this is a person you've grown to know, grown to watch, and enjoyed their work and appreciated their work. And when you think about who you are as a wrestling fan overall, their name and face is probably going to pop up in your memory all the time. So, when these passings happen, that's the saddest part for me. It's like, oh man, there's another chunk of my childhood. Randy Savage was a hard hard, you know. When he died in 2012, it was like right after he did that toy commercial, remember? And it was like, oh, I was almost getting hopeful that Hall of Fame induction is coming and Randy can maybe show up on Raw, and we just didn't get it in time. And his passing, I was not ready for that. So when when the day comes and we lose Brett or something, that's going to be rough. So it just sucks for wrestling fans that we do have to go through this as often as we do, but it basically comes with the territory now. We are certainly used to it, and all we can do is just try to remember the good times and talk about it and discuss it and, do whatever we can to pay tribute to people that were so important to us. You know what I mean? So Scott Hall is a big one. I ain't going to lie. This is a pretty big death in wrestling. And I think over the next few days, I think a lot of fans, especially the young ones, might start realizing and learning how important he was, and despite everything I said here, you'll probably see that a lot more because there's a lot about him that I'm not sure what wrestling would look like had he not been there in the 90s during some of that time. Because like I said, he was always in the middle of it. He was always in the middle of everything. So he's a true legend, a true icon. And I'm glad he's a guy that we did get into the WWE Hall of Fame before he passed. You know what I mean? So I'll probably be wrapping it up here in just a minute. Let me see if there's anything else you guys have to say in the chat. Yeah, I mean, think about as we go to Edward's right, when we all become old, when you guys get to be 50 and 60 years old, and then, and then the wrestlers of today start passing away and stuff, and we start losing the Austins, and we start losing the Rocks, and, guys like that and the Edges, and, it'll happen. Some of those guys will outlive me, but they might not outlive you, and you'll watch them die, and it's sad. It's always going to be sad. It's something that's really never going to end. It just sucks with wrestling because it seems like it happens at such a more frequent pace, because not only do people get old and have health problems and pass away, you have a whole bunch of tragedies. And nowadays it looks like that has tapered off a little bit, but a lot of yesterday's stars are dying early in their 50s and 60s when, if they maybe would have done things differently, they could have been here till their 70s and 80s. But that's life. That's the decisions you make, and you reap the consequences. So life is life. Life is life. I want to thank everybody who hung out with us tonight. Appreciate you guys being here. Appreciate the likes, the engagement, and all that stuff. Like I said, make sure you subscribe and share your Razor Ramon Scott Hall memories in the comments below if you are watching this on demand. The next time I will be here is going to be Wednesday night. Dynamite looks pretty damn stacked on Wednesday. We're going to do a live reaction. Watch that together. Headlined by Britt Baker and Thunder Rosa in a cage. That's going to be fun shit. So you guys have a good rest of your Monday, and I will catch you in a couple of days. Long live Scott Hall. Long live Razor Ramon. And long